Good morning, everybody, and thanks to Diplomacy Festival to organize this event today. I introduce myself. I'm Francesco Bicciato. I am the Secretary General of Forum for Sustainable Finance. And my role today is to be the chairman of this very interesting roundtable. First of all, I would like to introduce our guests. I say you sorry for the absence of the Undersecretary Paolo Barretta, who is in a meeting, very urgent meeting at the Ministry of Finance. I would like to introduce the other guests. First of all, we will have a video coming from BlackRock of Mr. Giovanni Sandri. After that, we will have Fabio Massoli, who is the Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Head of Finance of CDP, and Guido De Vecchi, DG Innovation Center Intesa Sanpaolo, Mario Sander, Special Representative for Europe of World Bank, and Claudia Pasquini, Head of Risks Control and Sustainability of ABI, the Italian Bank Association. First of all, I would like to make a very short introduction about the topic of today, the sustainable finance as engine of the development. Then I will provide some questions for one of you, and try to you can say facilitate the chatting about this important topic. So what we can say to start is that sustainable finance is out of niche. It's definitely out of niche. Now, sustainable finance is one of the mainstream policies for European Union, but not only, also at the global level. The number is quite interesting. So 31 billions of asset under management with the SRI approach at global level. European Union with around 14 billions, so 50% of the SRI management at the global level, and Italy, which is in a good position, because in Italy we calculate around 1.7, 1.8 billions. So after UK and France, we are more or less at the same level of Germany. It is a young market, we can say, respect the other, but with a very interesting trend of growth. The first consideration is that sustainable finance at the moment give us some interesting opportunities. First of all, they allow a better risk control. Then we can say better return on investment in front of the non-ESG funds. This is some data that we have of 2019, but we also have a confirmation in the first 3 months of 2020, so during the pandemic period, the underperformance of ESG funds are, we can say, less than respect the underperformance of the non-ESG funds. So this is the first important things to underline. So sustainable finance in this sense also, from the economic and financial point of view, could be an excellent tool in order to fight the economic crisis and the pandemic crisis. The coronavirus caused a huge health and economic crisis, especially in Europe. And the health crisis caused by COVID-19 and its consequences constitute the immediate priority of the European institutions that have allocated a substantial package of economic aid for the recovery. In this context, it is relevant that the aim of the recovery package presented by European Commission is to revive the economy through a green, social, and digital approach to build a more sustainable future. And it is urgent to prepare and disseminate practical and straightforward proposal for using the EU financial resources under the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Another important point is that we have to underline the need to fund projects aiming at achieving economic recovery and transition to a green and more inclusive model of growth. As stated by the European Commission in the communication on Next Generation EU, the EU Green Deal is the EU growth strategy. I mean that the health emergency and the environmental emergency are part of the same package. So recovery and sustainability transition are interlinked and interdependent. We have to stress that sustainable and responsible investment, following the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance, can help identify economic sectors that are crucial to drive forward a green and just transition. Sustainable finance strategy and products like impact investing and green and sustainable and social bond. Today, I think that we will talk about this kind of innovative instruments can be used to channel public and private capitals into critical projects. In addition to this, a suitable regulatory framework, more quantity and quality of ESG data available to SRI investors is essential. The question of availability of data and is one of the key for the development of sustainable finance. Also, a renewed public-private collaboration between institutions, companies, and financial operators will be crucial to attract further investment and scale up efforts to meet the ambitious commitments made under the Paris Agreement, the EU Green Deal, and the National Energy and Climate Plan. The last two considerations are this one. Starting from this, we as a Forum of Sustainable Finance, but also other organizations dealing with this kind of topic, focused four areas for action, four concrete areas for action. The first one is sustainable agri-food, which is one of the most interesting and innovative sector that we are analyzing. Smart transport and mobility, green buildings, circular economy. And for each of these areas, key pillars of intervention and SRI strategy and tools have to be listed. Another important issue is the central role, especially in Italy, of SMEs and the necessity that we have to align the objective of SMEs regarding the Agenda 2030 and Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, we have to channel a substantial part of the Next Generation EU resources toward mitigation and adaptation to climate change in a perspective of just transition and social inclusion. It's quite very interesting that in this phase of renewal and reform of action plan on sustainable finance, the new platform already created the working group on social issues. So not only green good governance, but social inclusion are a key for a full sustainability of the investment. To achieve this goal, it's crucial advocating for the implementation of sustainable finance frameworks and approaches, and to make investments that are essential for a sustainable recovery. So drawing the attention of the financial industry and the public opinion to this topic is also crucial to generate such actions by the institution. So I stop here, and I would like to introduce the video of Giovanni Sandri, Managing Director of BlackRock Italia. So please, the video. Thank you very much.
Evolvere i nostri processi di investimento e di risk management all'interno dell'intera piattaforma per tener conto di questi aspetti. Ed infine c'è il tema della stewardship, cioè di quei team che rappresentano di fatto l'azionista e che sono sempre più ingaggiati in maniera attenta su questi temi con le aziende nelle quali appunto investiamo, nelle quali siamo investiti. Ricordiamoci che l'attenzione sulla sostenibilità nasce da cambiamenti profondi nella sensibilità delle società su temi come quelli ambientali o sociali, ma la finanza ha ed avrà sempre più un ruolo importante di catalizzatore, aiutando a reindirizzare importanti risorse economiche in questa direzione. Io con questo desidero augurarvi una buona continuazione dei lavori e, come ci diciamo in questi giorni, stay safe and stay healthy. Grazie mille.
Riprenderei la parola, non so se mi sentite tutti, purtroppo non abbiamo sentito la prima parte del video di Giovanni Sandri, abbiamo letto comunque i sottotitoli almeno per i primi 12 minuti e mezzo, il messaggio mi è parso abbastanza chiaro. Sorry, I shift in English, so unfortunately we had some technical problems for the video of Giovanni Sandri. In any case, we can follow the undertitles of the video. So I would like to go ahead with our meeting. So, Mr. Massoli, My question for you is regarding, that your perception of the state of the art today of the SRI market. And from one side, it seems that we have a big growth. From the other side, a sort of, as you underlined, immaturity. So I would like to have the CDP perspectives in terms of which are the main financial tools that you are using, you are launching for the pandemic period, and your position as an investor, as a sustainable investor, we can say, than more than an issuer. So I give you the floor, please.
So, first of all, let me thank you, everybody, for the opportunity, and the Diplomacy Festival for the opportunity to bring this topic, which in my point of view is extremely important to the attention of a wider audience than normal, let me say, because normally when we are talking about sustainable finance as a sort of niche sector for finance gurus, but of course this is not anymore correct. So speaking about this important topic also to a wider audience, in my point of view, again, is extremely important, because sustainable finance is at the core of a sustainable future for us, to us. As was introduced, I found extremely interesting the introductory video and also your introduction to the speech, because basically there has already been touched several points, which are in particular two interesting dimensions that in my point of view are particularly important. On one side, returns on investment, which normally is a concept of which goes hand to hand in connection with risks. And the other side, the central role of sustainability inside the European recovery plan. For many years, we've been talking about sustainable finance. Sometimes it's confused also with the sustainability of finance, which is a completely different topic, and we can open a debate about this. But what exactly means sustainable finance for investors? As you mentioned, we at CDP, in my point of view, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti is the national promotional institution of Italy. So basically, it's the entity in the Italian economic environment that support the growth of the economy, also using the European funds. As I was mentioning, I think that we at Cassa Depositi e Prestiti have a sort of privileged angle in some way, because we are both an issuer in the social bond market, which I will describe in a moment, and at the same time, as you, Mr. Becciato correctly mentioned, that we are also an issuer. So we collect from funds from the investors in the capital markets to finance social activities. So the basic idea is that sustainable finance is a way of guaranteeing the capacity for the future. So the rational use of resources, as we do not compromise the ability to continue to produce value over time. Asset managed with ESG, this has already been highlighted by BlackRock, are growing faster than the rest of the investing industry. And this is, you have to think that, as an example, in the last couple of years, ESG investment are growing at a double-digit pace compared to a single-digit decline in the total industry market. And as was already mentioned, is also at the center of this, at the center stage of the European Commission, which in March 2018 published the Action Plan for Sustainable Finance. You correctly said that I always saying that this market is a little bit immature, in the sense that we know for sure that the so-called green market is something well established since a few years. So the financing of the energy transition or the financing of green project is something which is very, very well known and established in the financial market. When we are talking about sustainability and social initiatives. To be honest, this is something that is growing in the last few months, unfortunately, due to the pandemic issue, but it's something that is still very small if compared to the other financial sector. This is particularly true because, again, the main focus was on the green economy. Also because it is simple to understand these initiatives in terms of climate change. It's more difficult when we are talking about and we are trying to assessing social initiatives. Let me give you an example about this. In my point of view, when we are talking about the sustainable finance, we are talking about a world that is connecting, on one side, the demand from investors to put their money at the disposal of a sustainable future, and on the other side, the need of the corporation mainly, so the issuer, to get financed for this very important project. At the core of this activity, there is one word, which is transparency. So how we can be sure that the investment from the that are coming into some corporation are effectively used for the better sustainability of the future. So transparency is the core for this kind of activity, and we have put in place in the last few years several rules in terms of capital market to understand that. So this is very simple in the green finance, because basically we are basing on KPIs. So basically we are monitoring, as an example, the impact on CO2 reduction of a specific project. Is a little bit different when we are talking about social initiatives, which sometimes are more qualitative. I'm thinking about initiatives to raise employment or for better health and so on. And it's very difficult to identify specific KPIs that can give transparency. But anyway, going back to the main topic of the questions, what has been trying to do in the last few months is to put the social bond at the center of the stage. You have to think that just in the first few months of the 2020, more than $32 billion of social and sustainable bonds were issued in the market, which is an amount very different from what has been done in the past. And the project financing, including improving food securities, access to education, as well as healthcare, of course. So as I was mentioning, transparency is as the core, so it's extremely important that investors are not just looking at returns. Of course, historically, returns on this type of investment are higher than the one in the general investment, but again, it's much depend also on the fact that at the moment there is a very interesting demand from investors, but still the offer is quite small. As we demonstrated as Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, it is possible to raise funds to coordinate with investors on the other side on the social principles. We have financed, as an example, social housing in the past. We have issued a pandemic emergency bond during the COVID crisis, and in the last few weeks, we have also issued a social bond to finance the growth of corporation in Italy. But again, it's extremely important that we put transparency at the center stage of this dialogue between investors on one side and issuer on the other side. So in a nutshell, we have to find a way of creating a more mature market, a growing market, a fast-growing market, not only in terms of volumes, but also in terms of instruments that can be used effectively to support the growth of our future, because we are putting, again, at the center of the stage, the sustainability of our future. I'm leaving the word again to you, Francesco, for the others.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Fabio. And I think that it's quite interesting what you say, and this active and proactive role of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti as sustainable investors. for the SRI market and for the country. It's quite important, this positioning that your organization has to do. So the floor now to Guido De Vecchi, who is the responsible of the general direction of innovation of Intesa Sanpaolo Group. So Guido, what I would like to ask you, which is the approach of Intesa Sanpaolo regarding the issue of innovation and sustainability. So how the new strategy of digitalization and technology fit in the sustainable policy of your group, and the other issue that I would like to stress is, which is the responsibility role that a big group or big financial group like yours is assuming in front of this economic crisis, and also in the perspective of the post-COVID scenario. So please, Guido, I give you the floor.
Infrastructure are not helping us.
Now I hear you. Try to speak, Guido. No, not now.
Are you hearing me? Francesco,
Yes,
can you hear me?
I hear you. Now, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Francesco. Thank you very much for the invitation. I mean, it's a very strategic and important point for Intesa Sanpaolo. I mean, for all our country, for the globe. Let's go straight to the point. Yesterday, the diplomacy of science was emphasized because science today is more than ever is in some way the common thread of the strategic interaction that distinguishes the current context involving the institutional government, but also the world of business. And we see this especially in reference to A, the need to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic, B, the same thing for the theme of the Green New Deal, and that is the theme of the environmental crisis. Whenever more here, science helps to define the contours of the problem and to identify the range of possible solutions. So starting from this premise, it's evident the fundamental role that technological and digital research and innovation on the one hand and training on the other must be at the service of a new development model. The Green New Deal is, for example, the first of the 6 priorities that Mrs. Ursula von der Leyen, as chairwoman of the EU Commission, listed when she took office in launching her vision to EU 2030, testifying to how central this issue is to the European economy. The European Digital and Green Circular Track is one on which Intesa Sanpaolo Innovation Center has oriented part of its mission. And here I would like to remind that technologies have critical issues depending on the type of technology, and depending on the use of the technology, attention must obviously be paid to environmental effects on the different users. Having said that, 3 key points may be made here. The first, the circular economy and the key role of finance as enabling factor. Intesa Sanpaolo circular economy platform of 6 billion is a concrete example, also in terms of the risking for the group. The second point is the sustainable bond focus on circular economy, 750 million, successful example in which Intesa also leads the way to help investors understand that circular economy is not only green, but it is actually green 2.0, therefore the key role of Intesa Sanpaolo. Third point, role that the bank also plays at the country level, the memorandum of understanding with United Arab precisely specifying to the proactive role that helped to trigger a systemic path for sustainable development, where once again the public and private spheres are joined. To return to the theme of diplomacy in support of this path and the role of finance, I'd like to recall here two international events that directly involve Italy and that will mark the evolution in a circular, sustainable way for years to come. First of all, the economy of Francesco for an economy of a human scale, the symposium wanted by Pope Francis, presented to the world today and to be held digitally in November, a youth project in which entrepreneurs and young people under 35 years of age participate to shape a new economic and social world agenda proposed in this time of crisis. And here finance plays and will play a central role, and a group like Intesa Sanpaolo will obviously be able to interact and work in collaboration with this youth project of Pope Francis. Number two, the other important element, also international, involved Italy and the United Kingdom, first of all, in view of the next climate conference, COP26, which aims to define the new agenda of concrete responses in the fight against climate change. Italy and England will do a sort of tandem with Milan to manage the preparation of the conference with young people, and with Glasgow that will host the actual conference with its Commonwealth of State in November 2021. I would like to reserve the closure to mention the commitment that we are putting with the role of finance in participating in Table Italy 2030, led by the Italian Minister of Economic Activities, and the fact that from our point of view, finance is no longer considered, as it has been up to now, partly of an obstacle to spread of the transformation in a circular economy, but rather thanks also to our role of strategic partner of Ellen MacArthur Foundation, just like BlackRock, as a tool for transformation. Thank you very much, Francesco, for your time.
Microphone now. Okay, can you hear me? Yes, I think yes. Thank you very much, Guido. It's quite interesting again to know that one of the biggest financial group at global level is so committed to this issue of the sustainable finance. And you mentioned also some some international appointment that we will have in order to disseminate our policies on sustainable finance and stay in international, we can say, framework. I would like to give the floor to Mario Sander, who is the special representative of World Bank. And Mario, for you, I have a couple of questions, couple of observations, and to have your feedback. The first one is from the World Bank perspectives, which are the main effects of pandemic at a global level on poverty and most vulnerable people. This is one of the most important things that I would like. And the other one, which are the main action and resource mobilized by World Bank. I remind that in 2019, you launched the World Bank Sustainable Development Bond. So I would like to know if this kind of strategy that started in 2019 is continue also during this period, or you are implemented other strategies. So I give you the floor, please, Mario.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for inviting us, and thank you, Francesco, for your introduction. Of course, as you said, the World Bank is a slightly different animal than the previous speakers, maybe a bit closer to Casa dei Prestiti, in the sense that our investment is entirely meant to finance sustainable development. And the bonds you mentioned is, of course, one source of us refinancing ourselves. primarily the resources of the World Bank come from leveraging its capital and, of course, new donor contributions, in particular, the Fund for the Poorest Country, the IDA, International Development Association. But maybe what I would like to explain a little bit to your two questions, effects of the pandemic on the world's poor and vulnerable, and what are we doing? And we have, of course, reacted very quickly to it. We got a lot of requests from our client countries and shareholders to act quickly. And the framework for that is called resilient recovery. And that really has two parts to it. There is one, which is meet very urgent needs right away. And then at the same time, prepare the ground to not lose sight of the longer term goals and opportunities, which is basically the path to the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. So these two, we had to kind of balance. And what have we done? I think the biggest announcement that some of you may be aware of is our announcement that we will finance up to $160 billion, the World Bank Group in total, between April 2020 this year and July 2021 to address the COVID pandemic and its consequences. And 50 billion of this 160 are concessional transfers from IDA. That's our window for low-income countries. And it also has a provision for debt relief, because many of the countries already went into the COVID pandemic crisis with a very heavy debt burden that is now exacerbated because a lot of the income they were expecting has, of course, not come. Question of, there's no question, you've mentioned it, is a drastic increase in human, from a human point of view, but also economic thought. So our estimates were that many more than 100 million people will fall into extreme poverty. And extreme poverty, as is defined by the United Nations, and we follow that definition, it's $1.90 per day. So that is near nothing. So after 20 years, for the first time, we are back in a situation where poverty is rising, not just a little bit, but dramatically so. And when we say extreme poverty, $1.90, what about people who are at $2.10, $2.20? That is also extremely depriving situation. So we say about 1 out of 3 people will be excluded from economic opportunities. That, of course, hits typically the most vulnerable: women, ethnic minorities, indigenous people, and the like. In terms of sustainability, it's always about the future. Education is the big thing. 1 billion people are estimated out of school, and we don't know how many of them will actually return after that. So what are we doing at country level? At country level, we try to put in place building blocks for pandemic-ready systems so that they are stronger and more inclusive in the way they address the consequences. What is very important, we don't take the approach of local or sort of very large national programs. It is local economic development programs. That's where we think we can reach the poorest and the most vulnerable. Also, I think it was mentioned in one of the previous interventions, or you mentioned that, Francesco, the question of data. So we have surveys to monitor the economic impacts in more than 100 countries across the developing world to get the right figure and data, to have a sort of scientific base on which to design, to advise governments on designing the appropriate programs to address this. Of course, the big issue is building back better and greener. I think the European Union's Green Deal was mentioned a number of times. We have a climate change action plan, quite similar. So the integration of climate considerations into the rebuilding. The point is not do exactly the same that we did before. It would be a really missed opportunity. So it's to do better, to come out is climate smarter. That's an important part. And of course, ultimately, or a big part of the recovery is creating economic growth and jobs. And the World Bank Group is composed of a number of entities, and one of them that I think many of the people here will know is the International Finance Corporation, IFC, our private sector arm. And they have set up a special $8 billion fast-track financing facility to really help businesses that are run into difficulty in the crisis to stay afloat, to maybe reorientate, refocus their activity in the crisis. It was already mentioned, and I can only reiterate that the importance of transparency, especially in these times when a lot of money is dispersed fast and there's a sudden unexpected need, transparency and accountability for the use of funds, both at our level, but also our client countries and partner countries, are tremendously important, and the World Bank Group attaches enormous importance to it. So the shape that this often takes is government to person, cash transfers. The World Bank supports, part of many of the programs that we have set up support direct cash transfers. Why is this right in the current circumstances? It is right because what do poor people do? They sell the one bike they have to make to do the deliveries or whatever their job is. The one investment they have, they sell to survive. So by setting up these direct cash transfers, we allow a lot of the smaller, very small companies, informal sector to stay afloat by providing them with resources for consumption, so that they don't have to sell their assets to gain income during the crisis, but also thereafter. So beyond these immediate measures, I think there are 4 areas that I want to highlight, and I think they illustrate pretty well where we want to go in terms of the resilient recovery. So that's always so what are we doing better? How do we want to come out better? What are the opportunities that are also in this crisis? And the first and most obvious one is, of course, education. The debate about remote learning, distance education, and different expressions for that started already before. And it started from the debate on quality of education. So a lot of countries have done the right thing. High levels of enrollment, boys and girls, and it was all good. But the education outcomes were not good enough for these countries to compete in the modern knowledge economy of tomorrow. So already then there was a discussion. We have to bring in technology to bring better education content into the schools. But now with the crisis, it's even more important because distance learning, remote learning allows children to attend school, to follow education, even in times of crisis, be it a national catastrophe, be it a war, be it a pandemic like now, and at the same time have better content that allows them to get the skills they need and compete in the modern economy. And the World Bank is supporting that in 50 countries where we encourage remote learning, and it goes from basically they're multi-platform strategies. So there's online resources, of course, there's radio, there's television, there's social networks, and of course also distributing better printed material at home. So when we have the remote learning, the online learning, that there's also material that the students have at home. So that's really, I think, a very tangible outcome in terms of what's different and what will be different after and better after right now. The second thing is linked to it, but in its own right, the big thing is digitization. Again, it was already big incoming, especially in Africa, but all over the world. And this will get a major acceleration. And I think I don't need to explain to this audience the obvious advantages. Digital access creates jobs, creates growth, contribute to transparency. And it brings in people that are not normally at the marketplace, people that are sort of in a village or are disconnected. They get all the information on price, on markets, can sell their products, advertise their skills. So it's really a great engine of growth, and there are big projects that the World Bank supports at country level, but also at the regional level to promote education, to promote digitization, but also the framework for it, so that there's a level playing field when people exceed the internet. Again, there are projects in all over Africa. There's Brazil, and there are many others, which I don't want to spell out now here. The third pillar is really energy. Energy is always part of the sustainability and climate debate. There is no question. Maybe just a few figures. The World Bank over 4 years has invested 6.2 billion in energy access program, which is of course very important that people can actually connect. And we have helped to connect 30 million people over the last 2 years. We have also invested $1 billion in what I could call mini grids or standalone grids, Because often there's the question, yes, there is a national grid in the big centers, but what about the remote regions? How do we connect these people? So there's the whole question of mini grids, standalone grids, powered by solar typically, but also other renewables. So that's quite a big issue, and the World Bank is part of our drive to expand access to electricity and therefore access to the economy in many countries. 90% of our total power generation lending is renewables. That's also part of our drive. The economy of the future has, of course, a very important, is based on renewables, and the World Bank is a prime driver of this. And lastly, and I think we all see that our event today is part of that, new way of doing business. Yes, there will be less air travel, less commuting. We will just do it different. Not that the in-person meetings will disappear, but we will reconsider, do we need an in-person meeting, or maybe it's better to connect remotely. So there's less paper, there's less pollution, there's less travel, and also it empowers or brings in people who are not mobile, who cannot come to today Rome, tomorrow Paris, Washington, but they still want to be part. They have something to contribute, and through a more remote working modality, I think we bring in more people to contribute to the economy, to be part of the economy, but at the same time we lose much fewer resources, which I think is really an important part. So the resource intensity of the way we do business will be very different and much better. And the World Bank, of course, is also trying to set an example with its own way, the way we do business today. I leave it at that. I hope I did not run too much over time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mario. Thanks a lot. Also because you help us to, we can say, try to rethink also international cooperation, multilateral cooperation. For example, the last issue that you underlined, the digital divide, is one of the most important issues, not only in less developing countries, but even in some areas of Europe, some marginal area of Europe. So I think that it is a gap that we have absolutely to fill up. So Claudia Pasquini. Claudia is the head of risk control and sustainability of ABI, and I think, Claudia, that you have for us some slides. What I would like that you can tell us, especially, is the new role in your perspective of the banks in order to get the ESG challenges, and especially which is the impact of EU regulation, in particular regarding taxonomy, disclosure, non-financial directive. I know that you are following very closely this process of regulation that we are facing in this period, especially in the framework of European Commission acts. So I give you the floor, please. I don't know if
thank you.
If you can show the slides.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yes.
Yes. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Banks, Italian banks, and sustainable finance. That's finance for sustainable development. I would like to share with you some points, give you some idea of what we are doing at the association level, the stream on which we are working together with our member banks, also raise some concerns and share with you some proposals we are supporting at European level together with the European Banking Federation. So thank you. Next slide. We can skip this very, very quickly. This is just to remind us the link between sustainable development and the ESG factor. For the sake of time, we can go to the next slide immediately. So the first question is sustainable development in the EU. Why are banks involved? As you perfectly know, in Europe, we have this challenging goals on environment and also on social. I think in the pipeline, social was planned a little bit more behind, but now it has momentum, and so I think it will introduce it quickly. clear. Anyway, banks are meant as channels to reorienting private capital flows towards a more sustainable economy. As far as the regulation already issued concerns, we are now more focused on mitigation and adaptation, climate change issues. But as I told you, all the other environmental objectives and also the social will follow, I think, very quickly. As bankers, not necessary. Please go. Okay. Stay here. I just want to say something about the taxonomy. As bankers, we do not have know-how in respect to economic activities that really contribute to these goals. So we welcome the taxonomy of the European Union, even if we have some concerns when it comes to the application of the taxonomy to the lending business. The taxonomy was meant more for investments, so we have some concerns when it comes to lending, and more specifically when it comes to portfolios of SMEs enterprises. I will say something on this later on. ESG factors, are they angels or demons? I think a good answer was given by the European Banking Authority that says these factors are characteristics and not necessarily they are positive or negative, but we talk about ESG risks, and this is a good piece of all the regulation for banks that is now on the table. This risk materialize when ESG factors affect institution counterparties with a negative impact on the financial performance on these counterparties, and so with risk to the banks. Next. This is a slide that I really like. It's a little bit complicated, but it gives a clear view on how the transition channels act, bringing us from environmental risks, like on the left-hand side, transition risk and physical risk, to financial risk, more specifically credit risk. So these environmental risks affect businesses and households. You have some example there. And this transforms, increase the exposure to financial risk. So this is one of the main topics for banks, even if we are aware there are also opportunities. Next slide. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea of the state of the art in the Italian banking sector, we have a survey. We run this survey each 2 years. It's called BusinessG because it wants to analyze the integration of ESG factors in the banking business. We have plenty of question items, and the redemption is quite good. 87% of total assets in the Italian banking sector. So one of these questions is, do banks have committees with direct responsibility on environmental and social factors? And you see the answers. 12 banks answered yes, and they count for around 75% of total assets. So this is an issue that is already in the governance of banks. Next slide. Another question is, do banks take into account environmental and social factors in their credit capital allocation policies? Here you see that the answers are a little bit more splitted. We have 7 banks, around more than 35% that say, yes, we already integrate these factors. So when it comes to allocate our capital specifically for credit business. But what is more interesting is that another 6 banks accounting for more than 40% say they are working on it and they will implement something within next year. Next, thank you. So what ABI believes would accelerate the development of sustainable finance or ESG finance? We have 3 dimensions. The first one, please, It's good quality and easily accessible ESG data on counterparties. What does this mean? Data are absolutely a main issue, and we propose to create at the European level a centralized ESG data hub where all the ESG information deriving, for example, from the non-financial reporting directive could be collected in a standardized way, and also with broken down, for example, by economic activity and not only at the legal entity level, because otherwise we will not be able to make a match with the taxonomy, which is a taxonomy based on economic activity. And then in addition to this kind of information, we would like to see here something for on the ESG profile on SMEs. They are very important for European economy. They are a big part of our portfolios. We know that the enterprises, I mean, it's not easy to them to collect some data. There are costs for them, but if we really want together make sustainable finance mainstream, and also with respect to all the European funds and so on, we need this data. So this is a very important point for us. The second point is that in the in the sustainable finance field, we believe that carrots are more important than sticks. So we presented together with the European Banking Federation a set of suggestions in terms of incentives, plenty, fiscal and other one. But when it comes to banks, one of the most important proposal is a risk-driven prudential proposal that it's called the Sustainable Finance Supporting Factor, and had nothing to do with the previous proposal, Green Supporting Factor. And the idea is to grant a small relief in capital charges to economic activities that are both aligned with the EU taxonomy, but also belong to subsets of the European taxonomy, for which we have evidence that there are also some material reduction in terms of prospective financial risks. The last point is proportionality for banks. Please, next. Proportionality for banks, but also for enterprises. We believe that some of the screening criteria on SME taxonomy are too challenging for SMEs, and we risk not to have economic activities aligned with the taxonomy to be financed. So in our view, for a certain period, some of these screening criteria could be relaxed for SMEs. Last slide. How see banks themselves in sustainable finance? We have 3 streams, and on the banking association level, we are working on all of them. The first one is the role next of banks as reorienting tools of the private financial capital flows. Obviously, this does not mean that we will finance only activities that are matching with the taxonomy. This is obviously not the case, but we must take into account this role. For this role, we have rules on the right-hand side, rules in terms of disclosure and in terms of transparency. So we are working together in order to make these rules really workable, also in terms of proportionality, as I told you before. Next role is we need to embed ESG drivers in our risk management processes. And here on the right-hand side, we have an example of rules like the one of the European Banking Association on proactive risk management, on asking the banks to setting strategic ESG risk objectives and limits, and to improve with customer engagement processes in order to better understand risk, so weaknesses, but also strength of our counterparties. The last role is opportunities. We have to look opportunities, and here we don't have rules, but on the right hand side, I would like to stress we must work together. We must to have ideas, and just to give an example, we are working here on some important economic sector for Italy, like the agri-food, in order to identify for example, the possibility to offer sustainability-linked loans to the bigger but also the smaller entities in this sector. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Claudia. Very interesting. So now we are perfectly in time. We still have 15 minutes. So my proposal is to ask you if you want to integrate your first the first part of your speech, but also I would like to underline the issue of the new importance of a social aspect in ESG analysis. As you know, in the action plan on sustainable finance in 2018, the social aspect were absent, were almost absent, and now we are take into account that considering the negative externalities that can come from a bad social analysis in the investments can be one of the cause of the failures of the stability of the investment, even from an economic and financial point of view. So COVID explain us how is important to prevent social risk. So I would like to know your opinion about that from your perspective. So I ask to Fabio Massoli, please give it the floor.
So thank you very much. This is extremely important what you said. In my introductory speech, I was talking about the importance of social bonds, but you have to consider as an example that we started to issue social bond back in 2017, so 3 years ago. We were the first European institution to issue a social bond in compliance with the International Capital Market Association rules on social bonds. And to be honest, was extremely difficult at the very beginning, again, because the main focus of the financial investors was on green side. So most of the mandate in terms of asset managers were focusing on the green side. Now, in my point of view, and you are completely correct, we have to understand that we have to put ourselves one question. The pandemic, COVID-19, the pandemic emergency changed in some way the perception about how can finance support social investment. In my point of view, unfortunately, the answer is yes. Unfortunately, because of course it's always better to anticipate, but finance normally is a follower. For the first time, we are understanding how much is important to channel all these funds also in something different from the climate change, which again is absolutely important. It is a center stage, but can be the only target of social responsible investment. We need also to look at the social impact as an example, education that was already mentioned, but I think also the intervention that Cassa Depositi e Prestiti did in the past about putting in security schools in terms of seismic impact. You know, Italy, of course, often, unfortunately, got the effect of earthquakes, and allowing the security against earthquakes is again extremely important. All the social housing, so helping in some way the inequality, or better, not only focusing on the poverty side, but also on people who are not able to allow themselves for a decent rent. So there are several topics that can be addressed in terms of social. But let me also highlight one fact that was stressed by Claudia, and this is the fact that when we are talking about finance, we have two different types of actors. On one side, we have issuer and investors. So we are talking about asset manager, we are talking about corporation and institution like ourselves. On the other side, you have banks. Banks with corporation with normal lending activity. Unfortunately, or better, if we are talking about the old paradigm about risk and return, banks will always look first at the credit risk and after, if the investment is going through social responsibility. But this is correct given the infrastructure, the target of the bank. So in my point of view, it's extremely important that we do some kind of work in terms of institution to help the transmission of the monetary and fiscal policy from the European institution. The funds and banks are an extremely important factor in terms of transmitting this finance into the real economy, as well as institutions like ourselves or like IFC and the World Bank. So we need all the actors need to work together and be sure that we are all aim for the same target, which is using the finance for a better future. This is, in my point of view, the key.
Thank you very much, Fabio. Very interesting, and I give you the floor to Guido De Vecchi in order to have, Guido, your perspective regarding, we can say also what Claudia said before. I mean that the new role of banks, and so you have the perspective of one big banking group. So please. Maybe you have the microphone mute, Guido. Try to talk now. I see the microphone mute. Okay.
Mr. De Vecchi, if you just tap once, it will unmute.
Try now, Guido.
Grazie.
Okay.
Thank you, Francesco, for your question. From my personal point of view, COVID does accelerate the need for transformation. Building more resilient communities and businesses is already a clear priority for the policymakers. What is needed now is a new governance in line with SDGs proposed by the United Nations. From the financial perspective, finance this time is part of the solution and will drive an agenda based on intergenerational equality, circular and sustainable business models, as the redefined approach to results based on impact. This is why Intesa Sanpaolo aims at becoming one of the most relevant impact banks in the industry. This tremendous crisis is offering at the same time a unique opportunity to reshape our economies, and we need to invest in creating the cultural and social conditions for a new prosperity for you. Thank you, Francesco.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Guido. So, Mario, I give you the floor, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think I didn't highlight it maybe in my first intervention, but if you look at the World Bank twin goals, we have two. One is eradicate absolute poverty. So by 2030, below 3%. And the second one is shared prosperity, which means boost the income of the bottom 40%. Because it is very clear in our understanding, we will not reach the poverty goal in the other SDGs if we don't address inequality. So that's first at the level of the twin goals. But also if you look at how borrowing behavior of client countries has changed. In the very old days, borrowing for anything social, no way. Countries would borrow for a road or for a power plant or for a harbor, but not for social investment. Then came a shift towards at least grant-based aid came, I mean, IDA and for the low-income window, bank resources were used for education, were used for health, so more into the social sector. And then even IBRD countries who get conditions that are closer to the market borrowed World Bank money for major investments in social sectors, especially health and education. And now we are seeing in COVID, bank funds are used for cash transfers, initially conditional and now just cash transfers. So I think it's a perfect documentation of how in the mind of policymakers, the importance of social investment, of the social dimension of development, and that as a tool to reaching the SDGs is there now, because it wasn't there before. It was not seen as an investment, which it really is. It is a key contribution to reaching the goals and to fight poverty. It's not just a nice to have or an add-on, or if we have the money. No, it must be an integrated part of the investment. And now the understanding is there. So I think that's a very sort of good illustration exactly of the point you've made. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mario. So, Claudia, I would like to have your opinion about that.
Yes, thank you very much. I said it before, I think that the social aspect, it's gaining momentum. In addition, I would like also to share you this comment that as far as we know, the three ESG dimensions are closely interrelated. So we have some evidence that enterprises with a good governance are also better positioned in terms of social and environmental profiles. And if we consider only environmental, I think it's a real stress and a bad situation in terms of, for example, climate change is the cause of huge problems in terms of social migration or poverty or things like that. So they are real interconnected. With respect to Europe, we must also take into account that, for example, the European Investment Bank, they have now a very focused strategy on environment. So, I mean, as banks, we in a certain way, we have up to now a signal of red alarm on environment. But I think banks are also understood that social is even, I mean, it's equally important because, for example, in a survey, we ask waiting for official data or standardized data or data by law from your smaller counterparties. What are you doing? And some banks answered, we are in the engagement with our customer, we are collecting the data by our own. And on the second question, which kind of data are you collecting? More E, more S, more G? The answer were clear on each and every of these three dimensions. So I think the message is clear. We have to work on these three dimensions together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Thanks to everybody. I just to conclude saying that I see that different investors from different perspectives are aligned around the necessity to go towards sustainable development. So we can say that we show that sustainable finance is the engine for development, but especially is the engine for a sustainable development. This is something that I think that is common from everybody. The first time that we see investors, banks, international, multilateral agencies, etc., everybody, we can say, aligned towards this SDGs path, which is the real future of our post-COVID scenario. So thank you very much for Giovanni Sandri sending his video, and especially to Fabio Massoli, Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Head of Finance of CDP. Guido De Vecchi, DG Innovation Center in Intesa Sanpaolo, Mario Sander, Special Representatives for Europe of the World Bank, Claudia Pasquini, Head of Risk Controls and Sustainability of ABI. I hope to see you in person, you and everybody, as soon as possible. So bye-bye, and thank you very much again.
Okay, ciao, arrivederci.
Grazie
Bye-bye.
Francesco. Thanks to all. Bye.
Grazie, Francesco.